All right, am I on? Test 1, 2. I don't hear me. There we go. That's a little better. All right. I'm not Dad. Dad is in West Virginia. He flew back. He flew out Friday, and he'll be back. Is it Tuesday he's coming back? Okay. But anyways, he the grandkids, and so they had they do all this stuff now that we didn't do when we were younger, but they had like preschool graduation and kindergarten graduation and soccer program graduations, and so they were all having all this and having parties this weekend. So Dad went back to be part of that and celebrate that. So he flew in. So I told him I'd fill in with him. Let's go to God in prayer real quick, and then we'll get started. Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the many blessings you give us, and we thank you for the freedom we have to come and worship you today, Lord. I just ask you to be with us as we go through this Bible class and we talk about evangelism and look at your strategy and how it was that you evangelized to people, and allow us to look at how you did that and use it in our own way to reach the lost for you, Christ. And it's in Christ that we pray. Amen. So y'all have been in here and Dad's been talking about evangelism, and I kind of tried to get where and what he's been talking about so far. And so what I thought I would do, since he said he kind of talked about the foundations, a little bit of the foundations and kind of the introduction into evangelizing and evangelism. Do you have any of those left over? I have one of them, please. Help keep myself on the right track as well. So what I thought I would look at, and I'm going to be honest with you, this is going to be maybe a little different than what you've seen before or what you've heard before. It's going to be challenging because it's a little bit of a different approach to evangelism than I think we've done in the past sometimes as the church as a whole. But I wanted to look at the foundations of an evangelistic strategy. So looking at, what would you build on as an evangelistic strategy for growing the church? And so obviously, if we're going to look at a healthy, growing evangelistic strategy, the first thing I'm going to look at is, what was Jesus' approach to evangelism? How did he approach people when it came to evangelism? So when we're looking at this, Jesus' standard approach is that he didn't have one. If you look at how Jesus approached everyone, I guess if you want to say he had a standard, that standard was he started where people were. If you look at all the examples of his interactions with the either non-Christians or non-leaders of I guess it wasn't Christians at that time, non-Jewish leaders, it was a very soft approach. And then when if he was talking to farmers, what did he talk about? The field, sowing the seed, right? If he was talking to fishermen, what did he talk about? Cast a net, catching fish. If he was talking to the woman at the well, what did he talk about to the woman at the well? Getting water, right? So he met them. He started where they were at. And you see that over and over again in his standard approach to how he interacted with people. So in order to be where people are, in order to be effective, you have to be flexible. I can't just go and talk about sowing seed to a bunch of people who grew up in the city. I'm not going to go and talk about use farming examples to people who grew up in the city. I'm not going to use city examples growing up in the farm. One of the examples that Dad had, which I think was interesting, when he started his bus ministry back in Parkersburg, West Virginia, the church there, they would go to these rural, out in the sticks, places and farms and stuff like that. And how did they go? Especially back, I think this was in the 70s. Yeah, because it was before I was born. What was the standard, even in any type of ministry, if you were going to go out and evangelize? What did you wear? Suit and tie. I don't know if he had a suit, but he definitely had a tie on and dress shoes. And he's going out to these farmers who, and one of the examples was, this guy's throwing hay bales. And obviously he sees Dad come up in a tie. He's like, and so he kind of was like, oh yeah, why don't you come help me throw these bales? Well, not knowing Dad grew up doing that in South Georgia. So he jumps up in the mud in his dress shoes and dress pants and comes down and starts where that guy is, even though he's dressed differently. And it had an impact on that guy. And so we have to have that same evangelistic style and approach. What was Paul's evangelism strategy? I know it's there on the paper for you. Anyone want to guess?
He became all things to all people that he might preach to all people. I know that's not an exact quote. But
No, but it is there. So if we look, I'll read this, 1 Corinthians 9, 20 through 22. When I was with the Jews, I lived as a Jew to bring people to Christ. When I was with those who follow the Jewish law, I too lived under that law. Even though I'm not subject to the law, I did this so I could bring to Christ those who are under the law. When I was with the Gentiles, who did not follow the Jewish law, I too lived apart from the law that he was no longer under, so I can bring them to Christ. Now here's the important thing, but I did not ignore the law of Christ. That's an important piece of information being in there. He says, I obeyed the law of Christ. And then finally, what Steve just said, when I was with those who are weak, I share their weakness, for I want to bring the weak to Christ. Yes, I try to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I can to save some. One person summarized this in saying, I am willing to do anything short of sinning to bring someone to Christ. I like that summarized up like that. Because that's what he's saying. He's like, if I'm with this certain group of people, I'm going to come to their level. If I'm with this group of people, I'm going to be at their level. I'm going to meet them where they are. And that's what we have to learn to do as a church and as a people. When we come to someone as Christians and we have we try to put this persona on sometimes of, we're that holier, I call it the holier than thou, I've got it, I've arrived. You're not going to meet anyone who's out in the world and be able to convince them that way. Because either they're going to, one, think you're just full of yourself, or two, feel that you're way above where they can even ever be, and so they're not even going to try. And so that's why I always think it's very important that when we are evangelizing to people, we let them understand, look, I don't have it all together either. I have my struggles. I got my things I'm working on. You're going to have the same thing, but we just need to work together through them, through Christ. Christ is the only thing that makes the difference. So a foundation of evangelistic strategy, we're going to look at three different things or three different areas that we can look at for a healthy, growing evangelism strategy. And I'm going to be honest with you, some of these, when you first read them, you're going to think, I don't know if I like that or not, but I think as we talk through them, you'll understand. The first one, the needs of an unbeliever should determine your evangelistic programs. Thoughts? The needs of an unbeliever, or of the unbeliever, should determine our evangelistic programs. I get a lot of... Now here's what I mean by that. Let's look at Mark 2:17. When Jesus heard this, he told them, healthy people do not need a doctor, sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinner. So what are the needs that we see of unbelievers? The ultimate need, right, is that they need Christ. That's the ultimate need. But how do we get there? How do we get to that? We can't just go out, for the most part, and find someone who's unchurched or not a believer and say, you need Jesus, you need to come now. and then just follow. You know, Jesus had that effect on people. He said, come follow me, and they just walked. But we're not Jesus. But we can look at some of the things that Jesus did, like I just talked about. So what are some of the needs that you see in the community right now? Just Lake Park. Physical needs, right? Drug addiction, right? Alcoholism. Health. Weight loss. Divorce. Parenting. Who in here needs help parenting? You've got to focus on the symptoms of unbelievers to get to their real problems. Focus on what is going on out there. So what are some of the symptoms of these problems? Pornography. What's that a symptom of? Right? Marriage problems. What's that a symptom of? Stress. Could be a number of things, right? Lack of communication. Pornography.
Not happy with what you have.
Not being satisfied with what you have. There's 1,000 different symptoms out there that we could look at. But we have to focus on those symptoms to get to the real problem. And we've got to be able to help people. If you look here in Matthew 20, verse 52, and this is the thing, so this is what I meant to say. When we ask for those needs, in order to find out what people's needs are, what do we have to do? Ask them, right? Look at Jesus. Matthew 20, 32. When Jesus heard them, he stopped and called and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" That's the very first thing he did. When he interacted with a lot of people, the first thing he said, "What do you want me to do?" Or "Do you want me to heal you?" We see it in Luke 18, 40 and 41. When Jesus heard him, he stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. As the man came near him, Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he said, "Lord, I want to see." So how are we going to know the needs of our community? Ask them. Go out to them and say, "What can I do for you?" And that's what Jesus said. What do you want me to do for you? Does anyone know what this is called? It's gotten a negative connotation sometimes in the church, but do you know what this is called?
Evangelism.
Friendship, evangelism. It is a term, okay? But
Door knocking.
door knocking.
Well, I mean, honestly, you could seriously go out, and that is the purpose of your door knocking, to ask that question.
Yep.
Not driving church or something. Hey,
No.
what can we do? What can we do to help you?
One of the churches I studied in this, the very first thing before they went in to plant a church in this community, the very first thing they did is that exactly right there. They walked around and said, "Hey, we're looking at planting a church in this community. We have these 5 questions." And the 5 questions were along the, why do you go to church? And if if they answered the first question, yes, I go to church, they walked to say, "Thank you, have a good day." Because they were there to reach the unchurched. The second question was, well, if you don't go to church, why don't you go to church? And then they would write down the reasons. And then they said, one of the things they said, if someone, make sure I don't have this memorized yet, but they did not you, but if someone was having a problem, what would you say is the biggest need in the community? Not say, what's your biggest need? What did you say? Because then a lot of times they'll give you their own. They went through and whenever they established the first Sunday of that church, before they left, they wrote a letter to the entire community and said, "Hey, we're starting a church. These are the things we're going to focus on." The very things that the community had just given them. They had like 300 and some people the first Sunday. But this is called, and again, this has gotten a negative connotation sometimes in the church. This is called felt needs evangelism. It's meeting people's felt needs. Now, what's the difference between a felt need and a real need? A felt need is something you feel that you need, right? And it may be something that you need. A real need is things like water, food, those type of things. Felt needs are things that you a lot of times are going through and feel that you need. Now, you don't maybe necessarily need them to survive or to live, but you still, from an emotional standpoint, a lot of times you need them. And so that's what Jesus did. When he went and met people, he said, "What can I do for you?" So in part of this, going out and meeting people's felt needs, and so we look at a lot of these in the Bible. Jesus started every one of there was lepers, there was the tormented, the lame, the blind, the hungry, the adulterers, the soldiers, the tax collectors, all the sinners. And we could put a list together of our own, just from our own communities. But the point of doing the felt needs and reaching people's felt needs is because it gets you access into their deeper needs, right? Which is Christ. That's how you get a foot in the door. If you meet someone's needs in the community, then they're going to be a whole lot more willing to help you or listen to you when you talk to them. I mean, I can do all the door knocking and all the going in and just meeting people and talking to them saying they need Christ, but it's just going to go in one ear and out the other, or you're going to get just a door slammed in your face. But if you go to someone and they have a sincere need that they feel they need met, and you meet that need, they're going to be a lot more open to you and what you have to say, because they're going to see that you live what you're talking about. But here's the thing, and I think that as part of this evangelism strategy, we've got to learn to catch the fish before we clean them. Now, us in here who in here likes the fish? All right. Who in here has ever caught a fish that was cleaned before you caught it? Prepared for you already. So what I mean of that, and some of you know churches and people who, they expect you to be almost perfect before you even walk into the church building, right? It's like, well, you've got to meet all these standards before you can be a part of this. That's not how Jesus worked. Jesus worked by taking the dirtiest of dirty. When he would touch leopards, I mean, that was just taboo in that day. I mean, you just did not do that. For obvious reasons, because you did not want to get leprosy. But you can't clean people before bringing them to Christ. It's impossible. Only Jesus can clean us. And so we've got to learn, and sometimes this is hard, because what happens? The longer we're Christians, what happens? The longer we are Christians and we're around more Christians, we forget what? What it's like to be a non-Christian. And sometimes our approach becomes a little harder sometimes. And so, like I said, we got to learn to get back down on their level and do this. So here's what's been learned through studying this. Anyone can be won to Christ if you discover the key to their heart. And Jesus did this. Jesus, he fed people, he healed people. He found he said, "What do you need?" And I'll find that key, and then he worked. When you study why people came to Christ, there was a lot of what we would call illegitimate reasons why people came to Christ, right? Why did a lot of people come to see Christ? He fed them, right? How many times do we do an event that's going to have free food and we have a ton of people show up, right? They're not coming to the church for what we would call the right reason, but they're coming. What was another reason he came to them? People came to him. They wanted to be healed. Right? So a lot of the times, honestly, most of the time that you see a lot of the people come to Jesus to listen to him was for selfish reasons. But what did he do? He did it anyways, right? And he changed them in the process. Not all of them, but he changed a lot of them. So the key is, and I got it up here, is hurts, their needs, their questions. They're going to, non-Christians do have a lot of questions. They have a lot of interest into what it is we do and why we believe what we believe. But a lot of times they're afraid to ask. So it's, what do you want to ask me? What do you want to, We're not always going to have all the answers. But if we open up that line of communication, then you're going to have a whole lot more opportunity to reach someone. And this, a lot of times, is called friendship evangelism, right? But I think it's more than that, because we don't always have to become super friends with everyone we bring to Christ. You can serve someone without becoming their best friend and still bring them to Christ. The key then is just to look for their hurts. And no one's going to be converted until they realize that they have a need for it. And so those are going to be the biggest things. And the next point is, before you can share the good news with anybody, you have to catch their attention. And the best way to catch their attention is to service a need. 100 years ago, the church catching the attention of people was not a problem, right? If you looked at the average community 100 years ago, even 50, 60, 70 years ago, a lot of towns, the church was the biggest building in town, right? The minister or pastor or whatever they were called was the most prominent person in town, usually the most educated person in town. The social calendar of the community was the church calendar, for the most part. None of that is true today. Go ahead, Steve.
It was very important to me.
It is.
It's still true.
Yeah. Well, but it's important to us.
I know, you meant to the world.
Yeah.
Give me a hard time.
I appreciate it. But it did. Our church calendar used to be what the community did. They were tied together. That's just not the way it is anymore. We compete for 1,000, actually just tens of thousands, millions of things now that we compete with. Let me ask you this. What do you think, and I might touch a nerve with this one, what do you think is the number one thing that we are in competition with right now from a church standpoint, Sunday mornings? Sports. Who said that? Kids' sports is probably the number one thing that a lot of people are in competition with. I was surprised on Easter Sunday this year, there was a huge youth volleyball tournament that took place in, I think, Tallahassee or Jacksonville. I was surprised. I guess I shouldn't be, but I was surprised by that. What I was even more surprised by was the number of church kids who were there. And a lot of people say, well, Chad, you're missing one. I get that. But that shows what we're in competition with when it comes to getting people's attention. A lot of times we've lost the attention of our own people. So how hard is it going to be to get people to slow down and pay attention to what we're trying to do? To look up from their screens. I don't know what the statistics around screen time is, but in the last year it's had to have skyrocketed with everything that's happened. How do we get them to remove the earbuds, the AirPods, for just a few minutes to pay attention? The house meeting needs. That's really the only way. You can put flashy billboards up. You can put, all kinds of things. You can put advertisements out. You can even put really good lessons out there online for them to listen to. Let me ask you this real quick. Does anyone know where most kids and actually middle-aged adults, I'll say, are getting most of their church theology from today? One app. I'm sure most of y'all heard from it. One app. TikTok. You would be surprised at the number of people who are on there who are teaching theology in a 1 to 3 minute time frame. I guarantee you right now that more kids are hearing church theology through TikTok than they are anywhere else. So if you're going to get in there, a lot of us are like, well, we need to stay away from that because there's a lot of stuff on TikTok that's not good. Where are they at? It's hard. But how are we going to get their attention? We're going to have to meet some needs. Maybe long enough to get them to look up from some of the places they're getting their theology from. It's a struggle. It's a lot harder than it used to be even 20 years ago. And it's going to be harder next year. It's going to be harder the year after that. And it's going to be harder the year after that. It's going to continuously get harder. So here's the last point, I think, of this one. The church will never grow past its ability to meet needs. If the church is only meeting a little bit of the needs of the community, then it's only going to grow a little bit. I believe this is why the average church in America is 75 members. Because if we look at church kingdom today, for the most part, the church is meeting the needs of what? Who's the church meeting the needs of for the most part? The needs of the people in the church. Not saying that's all, but for a good part of church, the church kingdom today, they are meeting the needs of the members, and for the most part, the members only. If you take and focus that outward into the community and say, hey, we want to know what the needs of the community are, we're going to meet those needs, you won't have to worry about your attendance, keeping track of it, because I've seen this. You're going to have to lock doors because you're going to run out of space. I'm just telling you, I've seen it. So what are the needs? Again, we have to ask. If you look, the felt needs of most unchurched Americans are emotional and relational. And we see that today so much. People are so confused. One, relationally, people, especially now, people have really lost the ability in a lot of ways to connect and form a real relationship. Because most of it's online or through texting now. So that's a new thing. If you can relate with someone and get them out of a world that they've never been in before, and then emotionally, we see all kinds of emotional, and it gets worse. I don't know how many of y'all work with teens or have teens now in this day and age. The emotional stuff and stress they go through today is 100 times worse than what I went through in high school. I couldn't imagine a lot of the things they see. I mean, I could do something at school, and it could be stupid, but you know what? For the most part, I went home. The next day I come back and something else was there, right?
You got to take that break when you left school.
Yeah.
Everybody holds it.
Now, when you leave school, it's with you. You got, if you do something, someone's making fun of you, they can make fun of you all the way to your house and back all night long.
It goes to work now.
Yeah.
Follows you everywhere. When I worked, my phone was on 24 hours a day,
Yep.
7 days a week. I was always on call.
Yep.
Always.
I'm the same way, like with what I do with my job. I am on call 24/7. I've got to keep my alerts on my iPad here and my phone just in case there's some crazy emergency that happens and I've got to walk out. I hope that didn't happen. But that's I got a phone call last night, 4 o'clock in the morning, because we're in the middle of an upgrade. And that major decision had to be made of whether we were to continue or pull back. So I talked on the phone from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock this morning.
When I was at school, you wanted to be liked by the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
So you had this, 15, 20-something people. Now with that in your hand, you have thousands
Yep.
and thousands of people. And
Yep.
when you send something out, you get these comments from these people
Yep.
you will never meet. You meet them because they're on the phone and
Yep.
they're saying these things, and it's affecting their life.
And that's the biggest thing. Everyone wants to be influencers, right? We want to follow, and we want to have so many friends. But a lot of that's just not there. It's not a real emotional connection. It's not a real relational connection. And if we can give them that, those are the primary needs. If we can meet that of the community, it's honestly, it seems hard maybe, but it's really simple.
Dad was talking last time he spoke about the generation now needs a family.
Yeah, they do. I mean, you look at, and this is nothing race related, but I mean, you look at like the African American community. I think right now 75% of the African American kids are growing up in a broken home. I think it's like 50-some% of white Americans are grown up in a broken home. Yeah. No one.
Emotional relational thing is because of the unfolding of the family.
Yeah.
It's no longer considered a important thing to do or be.
No. And we're going to look at that a little bit
Told
today.
over and over again, you don't need a man, you don't need a man, you need a man, you don't
Yep.
need a man.
Yep.
Do it all on your own, do it all on your own. And that has driven people apart and men and women apart.
Yep.
This whole feminist thing.
Well, I mean, it's not both sides. Women are taught they don't need men, and men are taught they don't to use women, right? Well, don't stay with one woman all your life. Why would you do that? Yeah.
That's really driving a lot of that right there.
Yeah. Having a home like I grew up in and like we were able to provide Kylie is a rare thing. Where a parent, you have a mom and dad who grow up and don't get divorced, and then raise you in church. That's even more rare. Yeah. So, I mean, if we could just do this from a family standpoint, say, look, we're a family for you, and we're going to actually look at that today. All right. So the next one, so I can get through these. I got 15 minutes. The mindset of unbelievers should determine our evangelistic strategy. So what do we mean by that? So we find their habits and their hang-ups, right? What if, one of the questions I said they asked is, why don't you go to church? So two of the things that was on that list of why the people didn't go to church was, one, they're always asking for money, and two, they did not like or want to go to a church that had a denominational title assigned to it. So when this church established, what is two of the many things they did? The first one, every time they had offering, they said, look, if you're not a member here, you're visiting, do not give. This is for our members to give. We're not going to ask money from people who are visiting. Every single time. It made them feel like we weren't just bringing them in to try to get money out of them. The second one, which is probably going to would be a little more controversial, they changed the name of the church. They dropped the title, the denominational title. And some people are like, well, why would you do that? Because it provided an opportunity. They said it was more important for us to drop that title that we may actually be able to bring people in than it was to keep that title. We knew who we were. We know our beliefs. But they changed that title. It was just something, I can't remember what it was just something church. They were just something church. So if you look here, and this is, we get into the Bible verses in this. Matthew 10:16 says, look, I am sending you out as sheep among wolves, so be as shrewd as snakes and harmless as doves. So what does that mean? To be shrewd as snakes but harmless as doves. You've got to learn to connect, right? You've got to be wise in how you handle people, but you need to do it with kid gloves. We struggle with this sometimes. That's a hard statement, that our evangelistic strategy would change based on the mindset of unbelievers. Go ahead.
That harmless as dove means do it in love.
Yes, right.
Which is kind of I can remember, I'm going back a few years, but I can remember some church magazines that just were not written in love.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do anything in love, and it was like, man, dude, what are we doing here?
Yeah. I talked about that on one of our, it was like, I went back and read some church papers from the 30s and 40s. Well, they were outright calling. They would call out this preacher and basically call him all kinds of names. And if we're doing that internally, what are we doing to people that aren't? It was horrible. But this seems kind of I guess what we could say, an oxymoron. I don't know what definition. But you're telling someone, okay, you need to be as shrewd as a snake, but be harmless as a dove. How many snakes have you ever seen that were harmless? There's some. There's a lot. And if Dad thought I was comparing snakes as not being, but you're not going to go up to a rattlesnake and say, well, they're shrewd, but I bet you it's harmless, and try to pick it up. Dad would. But we have to learn to be wise and to understand. And this is where this next verse comes in. Luke 16:8. the rich man had to admire the I like the way the New Living Translation translates this. The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of light. Right? So basically what he's saying, the average McDonald's owner knows more about human behavior than the average minister at the church does. Why is that? I talked about it a little bit earlier. They deal with it, they live in it. And like I talked about earlier, the longer we are a Christian, the less we think like the world.
Get out there and deal with the world, and you can go to school and you can take all the public relations and human relations things you want to take, and the book tells you to handle it like this. But until you get in that individual's face, not necessarily get in their face,
Yeah.
but get right in front of them and kind of find out where they're at. Everybody's handled a little bit different,
You just talked about that going to school. You can get a 4-year business degree. I guarantee you won't learn near as much as if you did working 1 month at McDonald's. I worked at Dairy Queen for 6 years. I had people threaten to kill me over a banana split. I'm not joking. I mean, full on. I had to grab a metal spoon that we had back there that was this big and tell that man if he come over there, I was going to beat him to death with it. Because of over a banana split.
And split.
Nothing. That was the thing. I made it exactly the way he made it. And I told him, I was like, that's exactly. It was in the middle of winter. It was the only banana split I'd made the whole day. But he wanted another free one. And I don't know. I guess I was just in one of those moods that day, and I wasn't going to give him another free one. But here's the thing in this part of this. You learn a whole lot about Christians working in food and fast food as well. You want to know what the worst day of the week is for people who serve food? Sunday when? After church. That's kind of going down another rabbit hole. But again, that's how we project ourselves. So getting to the mindset, that doesn't mean that we sin or accept sin because it's the mindset, but we use the mindset of unbelievers. If something is a bother or a hindrance to them, as long as it's not something scriptural, change it or adjust to it. If it's going to help bring someone in, why would you not? All right, so the last one, and this one's probably the one people might struggle with the most. The culture of unbelievers should determine now pay attention to this, evangelistic style. All right? The culture shouldn't influence the culture of the church, but the culture of unbelievers should determine our evangelistic style. All right, what does that mean? I'll give you some examples that I've dealt with. It's not going to change, like I said, it's not going to change the style of everything we do, but it will change the style of how we reach the people. And that's an important point to make there. I'll give you an example. When we first started doing live stream, social media, and technology, especially here at Lake Park, there was a lot of, internally there was some criticism, but there was a lot of criticism externally from other churches and other people. Because the main thing that was said to me, watching online doesn't count. Guess what happened March of last year? And I don't mean this to be arrogant. I hope this doesn't come across. But guess what happened March of last year? 4 churches called me. About a week of each other. Hey, how do we do this? How do we set this up? Because all of a sudden, online church counted. The culture of the unchurched should determine our style. If everyone in the culture is online, where should we be? Online. If everyone in the culture, no, I won't say that one. But you get the point, right? Yeah. Huh.
Just a few minutes ago, we employ so many, hundreds and hundreds of young people, and we've got to understand where they are. We may not like TikTok.
Yep.
We may have them sign off saying that we don't want them filming anything at work and putting
And if you study Chick-fil-A and their culture and their style, they are probably one of the best at adjusting to the culture and style of the current culture. Always changing. I mean, honestly, a lot of the stuff I've studied in the last 7 years has come from people who used to work for Chick-fil-A or still do, because they are probably one of the best companies at it. Why do you think whenever they're having problems giving vaccines to people, they call Chick-fil-A to come handle their drive-thru? Because Chick-fil-A understands it. They study. They don't just stick with the same. They're always, I mean, why do you think Chick-fil-A is always modifying their buildings? I mean, the one uptown, they just changed it like a year or two ago, and they're already changing it again.
To change to the style of people's
Yep.
habits, to increase the flow for the drive-thru,
Right.
because that's all people are doing now.
Because we've created a new habit, a new culture, right, where people don't want to go into buildings. They want to go through the drive-thru. Or even better, which I love, is I got the app, and I can do my order, and I pull up to a space, and they bring it out to me. What if Chick-fil-A said, we're going to refuse to change to the culture that we live in. We're going to continue doing it the way we've always done it. What would happen to Chick-fil-A? That's funny. But that's true, right? It took a while, but I mean, now you see all these others, they're copying. Who's copying Chick-fil-A now? Everybody. So I may not agree with Chick-fil-A, but if I see Chick-fil-A doing something that's working, maybe I should look at doing that. I may not agree with everything they say or do. If I'm McDonald's, I want to beat McDonald's. I want to beat Chick-fil-A. But if I see Chick-fil-A's beating me, well, how are they beating me?
There are denominations that are growing, and I'm not saying it to be a denominational church, but I'm saying that some of them and their evangelistic tactics are working, and they're getting some of the children from the broken homes who have not had any structure in their home life, and they're getting them to come because they're offering events or activities that have that less structure.
Yep.
To, like you said, bring them in and find out more about them.
So it goes back to this verse then, and that's exactly my point. Was we in the Church of Christ we wanted to distance ourselves so far from denomination that anything they did, no matter what, we wouldn't do. So one person joked and said, well, if they started baptizing for the forgiveness of sin, we'd stop doing it because they were doing it. All right? No, well, obviously we wouldn't. But anyways, that's how it got sometimes. So we need to learn to adapt, to change. So this is where it goes back to 1 Corinthians 9:22, right? When I was with those who are weak, I shared in their weakness, for I wanted to bring the weak to Christ. I tried to find common ground with everyone, doing everything I could to save some. Again, he didn't sin in this, but he found that common ground. He found where they were at. And let me go through this because I got about 2 minutes. Here's the thing. If you do this stuff, you will be criticized. You'll be criticized internally, and you'll be criticized externally. But here's the question. Who are you trying to impress? Are you trying to impress other churches out there in the world? Or other churches out there? Are you trying to impress your members? Or are you trying to bring people to Christ? Because here's the fact. Every church caters to some kind of culture. It may be a culture from the church from the 1950s, or from the 1980s, or 2020, but you're going to cater to some kind of culture. Whether it's the culture out there, and when I say cater to it, I don't mean we accept things that are sinful. What I'm saying is you adapt to the culture that's out there. If you see something that's working that connects with the current culture, then do it. But that requires you as a church and us as a people to be willing and able to change on a regular basis. That's hard because we don't like change.
Just went through a big split over same-sex marriage.
Yes, they did, because they've, and that's the thing. When I say adopt the culture, I'm not saying, well, we should accept things that are sinful, but we have to adopt a different approach to approaching those sinful things. The way we approach homosexuality today has to be a whole lot different than we approached it in 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, and 2000. Because we live in a different world. You have to be very careful how you approach stuff like that. So the question then comes down to, does your style match your community? Does your evangelistic strategy match your community? The people out there. If it doesn't, then you're not going to grow. And we see that a lot in church. We see so many churches now that are dying because they have stuck with the way they have done things forever, and they've refused to change. They're going to keep doing them the way they do them until they close their doors. And that happens in the business community. We saw that happen with Sears. We saw that happen with Kodak. We saw that happen with Circuit City, with all these places. They refused to change and adapt to what was going on around them. So we have to do this. We have to, from an evangelistic strategy, we have to meet the needs of our people who are not Christians, who are unchurched. Doesn't mean, like I said, doesn't mean we change our beliefs, but it does mean we change how we reach them and how we reach out to them. All right, my time is up, so we'll continue a little bit of this in the sermon.